Hi guys, I'm going to talk a little bit today about something very relevant to my own experience as a teacher, that is the interaction between the private schools and the state in China. So I'll start with a little bit of context, history, go over the policies, talk about criticism, and finally give a little bit of my own perspective. So just to provide a little context here, the OECD currently estimates that there are 260 million students in China and 15 million teachers employed to instruct them. Russell Flannery at Forbes estimates that in 2020, the share of schools that are in middle and high school that will be private will be 13.3%. Before 1978, private education was the primary form of education, dating back to the time of Confucius. In 1840, many private schools were created and operated by Christian missionaries, bringing a new type of education than had existed previously. Chinese operated private schools then often adopted the same techniques as the Christian schools. Obviously, back then, Western culture was often complicated and seen as a colonizing force. But after the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, all privately operated schools were nationalized. In 1978, a more moderate government came into power under Deng Xiaoping and enacted economic reform and transitioned to a socialist market economy from a planned economy. This allowed the private schools to resurge in the early 1980s, so much so that in 1997 the government officially defined private schools as being run by businesses, government organizations, social groups, and other social organizations and individuals using non-government educational financial resources to provide schooling and other forms of education to society. This all culminated in 2002 in the Law on the Promotion of Private Education. This law officially recognized the role of private education in growing the economy. It placed private and public schools on nominally equal footing in the eyes of the law. It granted equal rights and protections to teachers and students. It did not, however, guarantee government funding for private schools going forward. So why was private education experiencing the boom that it was? First of all, and the primary reason is the rapid economic development, basically allowing families to become a little more wealthy. You saw people coming out of poverty and desiring to educate their children. The one-child policy at the time also placed a lot more pressure on investing in that one child. Additionally, with the economic reform, the government reframed the goal of education from one that was primarily ideological in form to one that was meant to provide students with the skills to contribute to society and contribute to the growth of the country. Before 1976, there was a great shortage of public educational resources. Less than 3% was often invested into public education, which at that time was 0.7% below the international average. Also, high competition for elite public schools, which continues to this day, meant that the upper tier was being funded in a very highly competitive way, whereas the rest of them were not, causing dissatisfaction among people with common public schooling. The last reason I will cite is the migration from rural to urban areas due to the rise of urbanization at the time, uh, in along with the hukou system, which requires students to study only in their home province. As migrants who go to the coast or to the larger cities have trouble enrolling in schools due to not having the proper hukou, and often private schools are their only option. So, there are 5 types of private schools in secondary education. The first being high-fee private schools offering international degrees. Along with the opening of the country came an influx of immigrants or expats to the country who wished to educate their children in an international fashion. This also caters to Chinese students who wish to study abroad in university. Second, you have medium fee private schools operated by corporations. This often is giant companies with a load of investors. It is also sometimes real estate developers who develop an area and provide school on site as a sort of promotional tool. Third is medium fee private schools operated by independent entrepreneurs, people able to secure the capital to open up a school, largely driven by the potential for profit. The fourth is medium fee private schools affiliated to prestigious public schools. As I mentioned, elite public schools are very difficult to get into, but also highly desired for families. So, what happened was these schools, in an attempt to boost enrollment, sort of opened up some private schools so that students attending them could benefit from the name, if not necessarily the quality of education. Fifth, you have low-fee private schools for poorer migrant households. As mentioned, oftentimes the rural areas or places outside of large cities were and are underfunded by the government, and as a result, there's been a proliferation of these schools which cater to families of a lower income. Lastly, I want to talk about the effects of this law on society and perhaps on my own individual classroom. One of the things that is a real benefit is that obviously families now have a higher rate of accessibility to education, whereas prior they may not have. It provides options for families who uh, may not have students capable of getting into those higher institutions. It also creates a sort of higher rate of diversity among the student body, as opposed to having a student body consisting only of locals or people with pedigrees in the area. You often encounter schools that have an international element, schools with students from other areas in China, which itself is diverse. And as a result, there's an opportunity for cultural exchange. Third, there are opportunities for students to learn material outside the state authorized curriculum or entrance exams. Entrance exams being extremely important both for high school and university. However, it does sort of create a somewhat rigid environment at school, and parents often opt out of that and go with private schools, which are often able to cater more greatly to their needs. Um, Fourth, again, kind of going with the higher accessibility of education and the things I already mentioned, students often experience an increased rate of enthusiasm for learning. Some criticism of this policy is that some people believe that it merely exacerbates the issue of stratifying society. The fees, as mentioned, often exclude families who may not be able to afford them, not unlike the way that the elite public schools also do. Um, it also does create high transfer rates. Um, Students being pressured to move to the best school available means that they may not have the sense of stability that they might if they were to stay in one school for the entirety of their educational career. And lastly, a big one is the fraught relationship between private education and the state. The state, whilst recognizing the role of private education, also often has to regulate it in a manner that they see fit, while still giving them the autonomy to run. So the state kind of puts itself in a bind in that they are required to make sure things run efficiently, but at the same time are required to give them some freedom and let the markets sort of determine where students end up. I want to end today just by talking a little bit about my own experience regarding this issue. First of all, the Forbes article I mentioned earlier was largely in reference to the rise in the growth of the industry. It's serving more students than ever, it's employing more teachers than ever, myself included. The school that I teach at now would be considered the fourth type of private school that I mentioned, which is one that is attached to a slightly more prestigious public school. So as a result, the students that I teach are not performing as high academically as the students that they share a school with. But their families do have the resources, both social and monetary, to attend the school. So as a result, there is a bit of segregation between the students who attend the international side, which I teach at, and the local side, which is a little more rigorous. Um, but the students that I teach do tend to have some excitement and enjoy the variety of learning things outside of the typical material they might learn at a normal public school. I do have a bit of autonomy, as mentioned earlier, to design my own curriculum. I don't have to teach to entrance exams. And so I do have a chance to sort of teach some critical thinking skills that they might not receive in a local school. So this is a very complex issue, obviously, and one that I've tried to cover as briefly yet in depth as possible. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. I hope it was interesting. So yeah, thanks.